Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Children with special educational needs and disabilities are being failed, with parents struggling to get their children the support that they need and deserve. And we have to change that. I'm determined to raise standards for every child so they succeed in education.
That was Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions in October last year. With the government facing a huge financial shortfall in the budget this autumn and failed attempts to cut costs elsewhere, there is a growing concern among parents that children with special educational needs could face cuts to their education funding. Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker. Education, health and care plans, more commonly known as EHCPs, were introduced in 2014. They made it a legal requirement for local authorities to fund the necessary provision for children aged 0 to 25 with special educational needs. When pressed on this issue in the Commons, the Education Minister, Catherine McKinnell, said that the current government has not made decisions about the future of EHCPs. Dame Christine Lenihan, one of Labour's special advisers, went further, saying that the Department of Education is considering if EHCPs are the right vehicle to go forwards. It is perhaps no surprise that Labour are looking at this issue. The National Audit Office said last year, if unreformed, the SEND system is financially unsustainable. And there are a number of estimates around the ballooning cost of SEND. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy says overspends on the sector totalled about £4 billion in the year to March, and that will double by 2027. Elsewhere, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says that central government funding for high-needs pupils totals nearly £11 billion, up 59% since 2015. Experts put that down to the rising number of EHCPs being issued to children, up 78% since 2018. But SEND parents are deeply concerned about the contents of the yet-to-be-announced government white paper. Here's one parent, Tia Curry, who spoke to me about her son, who has developmental language disorder, a condition she says is not well known and which she wanted to highlight.
When I first looked for help, I was basically just told that there's no problem with my son, when in actual fact there was. He was completely non-verbal. In the end, I think I just got to a point where I needed to seek answers. And so I looked for someone privately, paid for that myself, and got the outcome of that. And I used that report to then apply for the initial EHCP. But getting that initial EHCP isn't the end of the battles, to be honest. That EHCP initially issued wasn't fit for purpose. And that's where the difficulties really increased significantly, including the financial strain on us as a family, which meant I had to leave my work. I had to support my son privately, and his needs were not being met. So he was losing out on his education in that time.
Tia, why do you think there was such reluctance or inability to understand the needs of your son?
I think it's multiple things, really. I think the system itself just doesn't have sufficient resources to engage with people. So I don't think there's enough speech and language therapists, there's not enough educational psychologists, enough occupational therapists. And so when you need to seek a professional's input, there are wait lists after wait lists. You wait for on one wait list, and when you come to an end of it and you actually see somebody, our initial meeting that we had, actually an initial assessment that we had with someone was done online, it's done virtually, totally inappropriate, and they weren't able to identify my son's needs accurately. And then we were put on yet another wait list. So that wait time causes a big issue in actually identifying needs to begin with. Then when you actually apply for the EHCP, you have an initial assessment done by an educational psychologist. And this is sent by the local authority. And those educational psychologists are given quite strict guardrails within which they are allowed to input on their report. So most of these EHCPs that get issued end up being written to cater for what provision is available locally or within a mainstream school, as opposed to what the child's genuine needs are. So there's a massive flaw just at that very initial point that doesn't attend to the child's needs. And then, of course, you end up resulting in a situation where a child's got an EHCP, their needs still aren't being met, and then you have to go to tribunal.
This must have been an immensely difficult and testing process, and a long process.
Oh, I think it's taken about 2 years of my life, and that's been 2 years of extreme level of stress, pressure, financial pressure, strain on the family. Yes, it's been extremely difficult.
Are there changes to the EHCP system that the current government could make that would help?
No. The idea of EHCPs to be taken away from parents and children would be an absolute disaster. That would be, I can't even imagine a world where that would happen, to be honest. It's unimaginable to me. If EHCPs were removed, then there's no mechanism to ensure that a child's needs can be met. There's no test that can be made against the law. A lot of the times these EHCPs being issued aren't being actually issued considering what the law is. And that's quite troubling, actually. I think reform is needed. Don't get me wrong. I think reform is very much needed. But I don't think EHCPs are the problem. I believe the system is the problem. I believe the provision is the problem. That's where the issues actually lie.
I just wonder, though, what your message is. The government is thinking about this now, hasn't come up with an exact plan, but is talking about a plan for, children and young people with special needs, special educational needs. What would be your message to ministers and policymakers now then?
I would say, please don't save up this trouble for later. These children deserve an education. These people deserve an opportunity to be contributing members of society, not to become a statistic or to be one of the numbers in prison or in needing mental health support. What you want them to become is independent. You want them to be contributing members. You want them to be earning and spending and paying tax because they deserve it.
So that was one parent of a child with special educational needs on the difficulties of getting the right support for her son with DLD. Joining us now is Dr. Susanna Castro-Kemp, who is director at the UCL Centre for Inclusive Education, alongside Sam Friedman, who is senior fellow at the Institute for Government, as well as ex-policy advisor to Michael Gove at the Department for Education. Welcome to both of you and thank you for your time. Susanna, can I start with you? Tia Curry's experience, is that a common one amongst parents?
Thank you, Caroline. Definitely, we have heard from parents in our research that we conducted. We did an evidence review of experiences of stakeholders in the SEND system, and we hear this kind of testimonial over and over again, and there's actual published research showing that. So, yes.
In terms of what you would say then to someone like Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, who says that too many people are claiming SEN benefits. He said that young people are being over-diagnosed. Is there a problem with that, with the number of EHCP applications?
That's a simplistic statement, I would say. The problem is a lot more complex than that. I wouldn't say children and young people are being overdiagnosed. There's a number of reasons why diagnoses are rising. One of them is that we are much more aware of the needs that young people and children present. And the problem is that the supports are not in place from an earlier age. So as part of our research currently that we're conducting, funded by the Nuffield Foundation, we're looking at SEND policy provision across a number of different countries. And we have seen that in other jurisdictions where perhaps there is fewer equivalent to our EHCP, so less statutory support, but more extensive and comprehensive support embedded in the mainstream school system from early years, that's what really helps long term.
So you see it as earlier intervention maybe being the answer. Sam, the National Audit Office, I mentioned, says that it's financially unsustainable to keep this system if it's unreformed. Local authorities have deficits soaring, partly because of education costs. I mean, the government's allowing them to keep them off balance sheet at the moment until 2028. How should this be addressed in your view?
Well, it's very difficult because the system is a real mess. It doesn't work for anybody, and it's costing far too much money, as per that National Audit Office study. But at the same time, you have parents like the one you had on your programme who have had an extremely traumatic experience with the current system and absolutely do not trust the government or local authorities to reform the system in a way that helps them and their children, especially when a lot of the focus is on saving money. So from both a policy and a political point of view, this is an extremely difficult thing to get right. What the department are thinking about doing, and they haven't committed to this yet, we haven't had any formal policy statements, is moving to some degree from what you might call an individualized system, these education healthcare plans, which take forever to apply for and are very bureaucratic and cumbersome, to a cohort system for mainstream schools, not for special schools, but for mainstream schools, where where schools get a lump sum of additional money and they decide how to support the additional needs of all of the children in their school. And that would allow for, the idea is that would allow for much earlier intervention, because you wouldn't have to get the education healthcare plan before the school was able to provide some support. So in theory, it could be a better system for everybody, but there's a lot of implementation challenges, and there's a very, very low trust from parents for understandable reasons.
Yeah, and I think maybe the main concern around that is that if you remove the EHCP, that is the legal mechanism. That is the one that obliges the money to be spent, I suppose. And so there's real wariness if you remove that, whether there would then be no kind of safety net for parents when their children do have those needs, Sam.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That is the fear, and again, it's understandable, especially when parents have had to often, in many cases, have had to fight so hard for these education healthcare plans in the first place. So, I mean, part of the issue, though, is as again, as you heard from your interviewee, in a lot of cases, even when you have this legal right, this sort of document stating the child is eligible for certain support, schools are unable to provide it, aren't given enough money to provide it. Parents then have to go back, ask again. It's an incredibly adversarial and cumbersome process, and only parents who have the time, resources, energy to fight their way through it, actually get the support. So you have a lot of young people, particularly from lower income backgrounds, who are not getting the support they need under the system because they don't have the advocates willing to fight this hard for them.
Susanna, do we know whether EHCPs actually work at the moment in terms of the research done on this? I mean, I know it's something that you're thinking about carefully.
Yes, I've done extensive research on the education, health and care plans when they were first introduced, and we reviewed with very rigorous methods hundreds of EHC plans. And actually what we saw is that the vast majority of plans are of very poor quality. They are not specific enough. The goals are not attainable. They clearly show that there is no communication and collaboration between the different sectors, education, health and social care, which was initially one of the main aims of the Children and Families Act and the introduction of the EHC plans. So there are many things that need to be improved for the EHC plans to work as they should. But I'm also not suggesting that we should get rid of them. The principle of an EHC plan is a very good principle and a very good idea, but it is the system around it and the training of the workforce on various issues, including cross-sector collaboration, that needs to be improved.
Having said that, the change to earlier intervention and the changes required would surely mean upfront funding. And again, that's something that is very doubtful given the constraints on the government now.
Yes. But what we can argue then is that there is a widely known effect called the Hepker curve that has been studied for decades, which shows that investments in early years give us the highest returns in later lives. So it's actually beneficial for economies.
Sam, in terms of the rising costs, part of it is also that children are being sent to private schools paid for by state because of the lack of provision in the state sector. That surely will be something that government looks at.
Well, part of what they're thinking about is how do you reduce the number of children in special schools? How do you get more children in mainstream schools? There's been a shift away from inclusiveness in mainstream schools over the last decade or so. And they want to reverse that. And that could be done in a variety of ways, by having more units in mainstream school for children who have more serious needs and things like that. But there is a real problem at the moment because the demand on special schools can't be met by state special schools. So there's a heavy use of private schools, and they cost on average about 3 times as much. So you're paying £60,000 on average, and often a lot more, for a place at a private special school. This is local authorities having to pay. It's one of the reasons why they're getting into such serious debt. And that money is money that can't be spent on other children who have needs. It can't be spent on the mainstream system, and it's just sort of sucking resources out of the school system. So yes, absolutely, they want to bring the number of children in private special schools down, because it's very expensive, and frankly, it's being exploited by a lot of private equity companies who've got into this market because they've seen an opportunity for a quick profit.
Okay, in terms of the flip side of that, do you think there's a financial incentive for some schools to support their pupils in getting the EHCP so that they can get additional extra funding?
Well, there's an incentive for everybody to get an EHCP because it's the only way to get support under the current way the system works, both for parents and for schools. Schools don't get additional funding for any pupils unless they get a plan. Parents can't feel they have that guarantee of support without that legal backing of a plan. So everyone's incentivized to get plans at the moment. That doesn't mean the children who have them don't need them, or it's not justified, or there's overdiagnosis, but it does mean that there's this huge pressure for everyone to get an individualized plan rather than to be supported by the school in a more generic way, because the school doesn't have any money to do that. So it's absolutely the case, and particularly since 2014 when we had new legislation, that there are more incentives in the system to get a plan, which is why one of the reasons we've seen such rapid growth in the last few years.
Susanna, there's another buzzword, and it's also part of what you're doing at UCL: inclusive education, inclusion. Does your research suggest that this model is working when it comes to inclusion?
The research shows that inclusion works when it's understood as more than just placing the children in mainstream. That's not what inclusion should be understood as. That's one level, but then there's a lot of research also showing that children with special educational needs who are in mainstream don't feel like they belong to that space. So what we mean by inclusion is to have children in a space where they feel included, where they feel like they belong to, and when they feel happy. So to create an inclusive mainstream space, we need a lot more in terms of strategic planning than just place them there.
Sam, a last thought. What do you think government is actually going to come up with in this white paper? Do you think that there is a well thought out plan. I mean, the Labour government's been in power for a year. These issues have been widely understood for a long time, and there's already been a really failed attempt to reform welfare for people with disabilities and other attempts. Is this reform of SEND education going to be better?
I think we kind of have to wait and see what they come up with. I think they're well aware of the lack of trust from parents. They're well aware of the lack of political capital that the Labour Party has. I suspect, my guess, is what we might see is proposals for reform for children coming into the system, but some level of protection for parents who already have, or children who already have, an education healthcare plan, as a way to try and manage concerns from existing parents of children with needs, whilst also pushing in a new direction. That's my guess, but we'll see. We probably won't know until October, November, when this white paper comes out.
Sam Friedman, thank you so much for being with me. Really appreciate your time. Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government and former policy advisor to Michael Gove, alongside Dr. Susanna Castro-Kemp, Director at the UCL Centre for Inclusive Education. Thank you for speaking to us. Well, that's it from us for today. This episode was produced by Harry Black and our audio engineer was Andrew Gavin. I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more next week. But before I go, I want to go back to the parent that we heard from earlier, Tia Curry, because, of course, she was describing a very difficult journey for her, her family and her son. Now she does have her son in a new educational setting, and she had this to say about it.
He's in the right place now, and the support that he's getting is absolutely amazing. He's getting a lot of professional specialist support through speech and language therapy. He's getting at least once a week, if not 3 times a week, through various different modes. And the collaboration between the teachers and the professionals is extremely brilliant, and it's having a positive impact on my son.